Hey, y'all. Welcome to a new lecture. This is going to be focused on the first real lesson of our new unit. Here's our new unit. Unit 4 is the scientific, philosophical, and political developments of the 17th and 18th century. We will reach back to a little bit to the 16th century, but for the most part, our emphasis will be on the 16 and 1700s. And we see a piece here. I do think that this piece really symbolizes the entire era. We see a scientific experiment. We see people who are amazed. We see people who are saddened. We see the scientist over here, and we see this guy right here. This bird is in a vacuum chamber. It's kind of alive right now, but it's about to die. You see the girl right here who's pretty shocked, and this little girl is sad. And this guy's probably saying, well, this is for the good of science. But that kind of helps you just kind of understand exactly what the era is really about. It's the pursuit of science for and philosophy for the benefit of man. So the first step is going to be the scientific revolution. What was the scientific revolution? Well, the scientific revolution was an era of drastic scientific change and prolific discoveries from the 16th to 18th centuries. So from the 15th to the 1700s. So it's not totally revolutionary. It's over a 3 century period. But in those 3 centuries, we're going to see a drastic shift from Western religious paradigm into accepting a mechanical view. Clearly, I think that word mechanical is really important. Mechanical, it is the belief that everything is machines. We're going to talk more about that. We're going to build upon that, but that mechanical world, we're going to connect that with Newton. Newton is the one that really develops that. And we're going to see the Western paradigm gets entrenched into secularism as religious leaders saw a dramatic collapse in authority. And we're also going to see absolute monarchs such as Louis XIV utilize science, kind of like mercantilism, as a way to further centralize their regimes. So the scientific revolution is a time of discovery, excitement, and change. So now let's go ahead and talk about the causes. The causes. What were the causes of the scientific revolution? Well, the first thing I want to point out is how did the medieval church lay the foundation to the scientific revolution? This slide is really going to challenge the concept of scientific revolution as the birth of modern medicine or modern science. It's going to view it as a continuation from the medieval era. Remember, as an AP scholar, we need to remember that we're thinking continuity and change. This is the only slide really that was going to see a continuity for a minute. First, we see natural philosophers. Natural philosophers were medieval scientists that worked within the confines of the church. They studied God's handiwork. So the Pope and the church was cool with the science because God's handiwork was the universe, it's our bodies, and by utilizing it, and it was proper for these natural philosophers to study these mechanisms, if you will. By the 15th century, monasteries became centers for scientific study and research. So much of the things that are going to be figured out in the 16th century are going to be built upon the 15th century foundation. So this, again, before I move on to the next slide, the Middle Ages is not anti-science, as some moderns might want to say. There is some stuff that is helping create the modern age. So historians may view this as a continuity. So, with that said, let's talk about these things. How did the Renaissance cause the scientific revolution? Well, here we see the rediscovery of ancient authors. Remember, Petrarch ransacking monasteries, going through things. Bruni with the rediscovery of Greek. Valad furthering perfecting the study of Latin. Ficino, who is going to discover ancient religions such as Hermeticism. Well, they also discover works by Galen, new understandings of medicine and medieval from the ancient Roman doctor. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, astronomer, and chemist. And Ptolemy, who we know about geography, but he also is going to study astronomy. So now, as we kind of march into the scientific revolution, the humanists have created a large amount of ancient works that had been really kind of ignored by the Middle Ages. That's going to expand understanding of science. So clearly, this Renaissance is important. Alchemy and Renaissance magic, or Hermeticism. This is all from the work of Ficino. Ficino and Pico, they developed these ideas in which we Humans are angels who are, once we rediscover our deity powers, that will be able to control society, will be able to control nature. The idea that we can turn lead into gold. And this is going to create the first scientific experiments. And over here in the painting, this is, you see some monks here. They're actually delving into alchemy and Renaissance magic. It hopes to create these ideas. But even though alchemy and Renaissance magic is all fake and faux science, then they do record the first chemical reactions. So we begin to modernize science through fake science. Totally mind-boggling. And then we could talk about artists such as Da Vinci and Michelangelo, their desire to study anatomy. With their desire to paint the perfect body, people like Da Vinci actually cut into cadavers, dissect cadavers to understand how the body was put together. And he recorded hundreds, if not thousands, of journals on this. So with the rediscovered ancient authors, the pursuit of alchemy and Renaissance magic, and anatomy, we begin to see the Renaissance really creates the first step into this. Now, before I step off, I definitely want to make sure you know the difference between a humanist and a scientist. The humanists are going to glorify the ancient authors. They're going to believe that Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen, they're perfect. They created this understanding of truth that the medieval church corrupted. Well, we're going to find out that the scientists during the scientific revolution, they're going to discover that Ptolemy, Aristotle, and Galen, in fact, they may not be true. They're going to challenge them. So during the scientific revolution, it's going to be a break from the Renaissance because they're actually going to challenge these ancient authors. But we'll see that as it unfolds. Now, the Reformation. Dr. Spielvogel doesn't mention this, but I'm assuming he just realizes since we've just covered this, you'd remember it. So I just want to hit on it. The Reformation. How did the Reformation cause the scientific revolution? Which I'm going to fix that. We see the end of Christendom. The Pope is no longer going to be dominating the academics of the world. The intellectual will have a sense of freedom. Because of the Concordat of Bologna of 1512, France is going to be able to free itself from the constraints of the papacy. Remember, this gave the French king authority over the Catholic Church. So even though France is going to remain a Catholic Church, they're going to be less reactionary than maybe Spain and Italy. Protestant states sought to understand science independently of the medieval astronomers because they believed that the Catholic Church was evil, that it held back scientific truth. So they want to progress. So the Reformation clearly has to occur. Now, this picture, this illustration is Martin Luther posted in 95 Theses in 1517. I do think that's causation because the first books of the scientific revolution will not be published until 1543. So the Reformation has to occur to create this end of this Christendom element. Now, mathematics. How did mathematics create the scientific revolution? Well, Renaissance artists and scientists came to believe that all truth, the capital T, can be found numerically. Leonardo da Vinci believed God's truth is found in geometry. He really is the one that pushed the ideas of proportions, such as pi, which you probably know, and a proportion called phi that deals with the body. The image here of the Vitruvian Man that we see, this is where he talks about, he really studied the idea of proportion of human bodies. And if you want to know more about phi, please check it out. Some really cool stuff. But he believed that God was a great geometer, that all things were found. So truth can only be understood in numbers. So modern scientists grew to believe that no truth can exist without numerical evidence. Again, significant as we transition. Now, how did the rise of the merchant class cause the scientific revolution? This is one of the things Dr. Spielvogel has in the reading. It might be kind of lost here. First thing is the technical problems. As the merchants are really expanding because of the age of exploration with the new understandings of bookkeeping and things from the Middle East, they began to realize they needed to find technical solutions. The best example, I do love that Dr. Spielvogel talks about tonnage of ships. Here's a modern image of tonnage, but I want to point out that this is what they were trying to figure out. They needed to understand how can they net the greatest amount of profits in the ships that they had. And so they are going to create mathematical equations on how to organize them and maximize cargo in that tonnage. So tons of ships, merchants said, hey, we want to maximize our profit. How do we get the most tonnage of products in our ships. Well, they're going to hire scientists to come up with mathematical solutions so they would understand how best to maximize. Really important. And that reliance on mathematics, which we just covered, really important. Merchants funded much of the modern science. This is a really important aspect. Merchants, they're going to begin to fund modern science because the traditional universities failed to evolve. The universities were still studying ancient, ancient law, ancient medicine, and ancient theology. Merchants were like, wait a minute, this is not truth. We need to fund this. So much of the scientific revolution is going to operate outside of the academic institutions. The merchants believed that theoretical science naturally would lead to practical solutions that would bring profits. That's really important, especially when we get to the capitalist states of the Netherlands and England, as we begin to see that the merchants are naturally married to the scientists. We're going to see how that plays out later. So, by the beginning of the 16th century, the foundation of the scientific revolution was laid by the medieval scientific discoveries from the natural philosophers who studied God's handiwork. The Renaissance humanists rediscovered ancient authors, pursued Hermetic magic, and they desired to paint the perfect body. This creates another element to the scientific revolution. The Reformation shatters Christendom, reduces the authority of the Pope, and increases secularism, a key component. The belief that all truth is found in mathematics, that only through mathematics can you find truth. Math, truth, one and the same. And of course, the merchant class is going to fund much of this. So, in the end, the scientific revolution is going to be created in the 15th and 16th centuries by these factors. I hope that makes sense. Good luck. Email me any questions.